AITA for refusing to babysit my sister's kids after what she did to my dog. So, some background. I, 32M, have always been the responsible one in my family. I have a stable job, own my home, and have a well-trained golden retriever named Milo, who is basically my best friend. My sister, Sarah, 36F, is the complete opposite. She's always been chaotic, making bad financial decisions, jumping from one relationship to another, and generally expecting everyone to clean up her messes. She has two kids, 10M and 7F, and while I love them, I've never agreed with how she parents. Sarah has relied on me for babysitting a lot over the years, especially since the father of her kids is out of the picture. I never really minded, but she's always been a bit entitled about it, expecting me to drop my plans at the last minute, rarely saying thank you, and just assuming I'd always be available. Now, here's where things really blew up. About a month ago, Sarah called me in a panic, saying she had a huge emergency and needed me to watch the kids immediately. She wouldn't tell me what it was, just kept saying, "I'll explain later, just please come." I had plans that night, but she was so desperate that I caved and rushed over. When I got there, she was already gone, having just dumped the kids with a neighbor, and I ended up having them overnight. I figured something serious must have happened, but when I finally got a hold of her the next morning, she casually admitted that the emergency was a last-minute trip with her new boyfriend. I was pissed, but for the kids' sake, I let it go. Fast forward to last week. Sarah called again, asking me to babysit because she had a work event. I was already feeling taken advantage of, but I agreed. I told her to drop the kids at my house since I had a long day and didn't want to drive across town. She did, and I noticed she was acting weird, rushing out the door, not making eye contact, just weird behavior. Then I want to let Milo inside from the backyard. He wasn't there. I searched everywhere. My backyard is fenced, so there was no way he got out on his own. I was in a full panic when it hit me. Sarah had been acting weird. I called her, demanding to know if she had anything to do with it, and she immediately got defensive. Then, after I kept pressing, she admitted that she had taken Milo and dropped him off at an animal shelter earlier that day. Her reason? The kids are scared of big dogs, and it's not fair to them. I completely lost it. First of all, my nephew and niece love Milo. They play with him every time they're over. Second, who the hell takes someone's dog and just gets rid of it without asking? I told her to tell me exactly where she took him and that she had 10 minutes to get him back, or I was calling the police. She started crying, saying I was overreacting and that she did me a favor by removing the burden. I hung up and drove straight to the shelter where, thank God, they still had Milo. I had to pay a fee to get him back, and they told me that Sarah had claimed he was a stray she found wandering the streets. I was shaking with rage the entire drive home. I called Sarah and told her that I was done. No more babysitting, no more favors, no more pretending like her selfishness doesn't affect everyone around her. She started yelling that she's a single mom and that family helps family, and that I was being cruel to punish her kids for her mistakes. But I don't see it that way. If she's willing to get rid of my dog behind my back, what else is she willing to do? Now, my parents are involved, and of course, they're taking her side. They're saying she made a bad call, but that she's overwhelmed, and I need to be the bigger person because I have no kids to worry about. But I can't get past this. Milo could have been adopted or worse. She didn't even think she did anything wrong. So, AITA for refusing to babysit for her ever again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for refusing to forgive my brother after he exposed my childhood secret to my entire family. So some background. I, 28F, have always been the quiet, reserved one in my family, while my older brother, Jake, 32M, is the golden child. He was the high school quarterback, the family jokester, the one who always had the spotlight. I never minded being in his shadow because I preferred to keep to myself. Our parents have always doted on him, excusing anything he did, while I was expected to be the responsible one. When I was around 10 years old, something really traumatic happened to me. I won't go into too much detail, but I was bullied badly in school, to the point where I developed a severe anxiety disorder. It got so bad that I stopped speaking in school for almost an entire year. The teachers called it selective mutism, but my parents just saw it as me being too sensitive and difficult. The bullying stopped after I transferred schools, but the anxiety lingered for years. I eventually learned how to cope, but it's still something I don't like to talk about. Jake knew about this, but we never really discussed it. He saw it as that weird phase I went through and mostly ignored it. I thought it was behind me until last weekend. Our family was having a big barbecue at my parents' house. It was one of those events where all the relatives I only see once or twice a year showed up, along with some family friends and neighbors. Everything was fine until people started telling childhood stories. At first, it was harmless, funny little moments from when we were kids. Then Jake, in his usual look-at-me way, decided it would be hilarious to bring up my mutism. He stood up in front of everyone and said, "Oh, you guys wouldn't believe how weird OP was as a kid. She literally didn't talk for a whole year, like completely silent, not even in class. People thought she was broken or something." People started laughing, assuming he was exaggerating, but he kept going. No, seriously, the teachers thought something was wrong with her. They had meetings about her and everything. She was the mute little ghost walking through the school. I felt my entire body go cold. It was like being 10 years old again, frozen in place while everyone around me whispered and stared. I wanted to tell him to stop, but my throat had closed up. I just sat there, trying to keep my breathing steady, while my relatives laughed and asked if it was true. Some of them started throwing in their own comments. "Why would you just stop talking? That's so weird. Did you just refuse or what?" Jake was eating it up, laughing along with them, completely oblivious to how humiliated I felt. My mom even smiled and shook her head, saying, "Oh, that was such a stressful year. We thought she'd never be normal again." I couldn't take it. I got up and left without saying a word. I went straight to my car and drove home. I turned my phone off because I knew my mom would start calling, and I just sat in my apartment trying to process what had just happened. Later that night, Jake sent me a text. Not an apology, just a casual, "Hey, you good? You left kind of suddenly, lol." I didn't respond. The next morning, my mom called, saying I overreacted and made things awkward. I told her that what Jake did was cruel and humiliating, and she just sighed and said, "You know how he is. He didn't mean any harm." Jake finally called me himself, annoyed that I was making a big deal out of an old story. He actually said, "Come on, it's funny now. It was forever ago. No one even remembers that happened." I told him, "Well, I remember, and I didn't need a reminder in front of 20 people. He got defensive, saying I was being too sensitive and dramatic as always. Then he hit me with, "You're acting like I told some huge dark secret. It was just a funny little story. You're really going to hold a grudge over that." I told him I didn't want to talk to him for a while, and now my parents are saying I'm ruining family harmony over something small. But I don't think it was small. He dragged out one of the most painful times of my life for laughs, and didn't even care how it made me feel. Now, I'm being painted as the difficult one, and I'm wondering, am I actually overreacting? AITA for refusing to forgive him? AITA for refusing to help my sister after she ignored my warnings and ruined her own life? I, 32M, have a younger sister, Emily, 28F, who has always been the golden child in our family. She was the kind of person who always got what she wanted, and if she messed up, my parents would swoop in to fix everything. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one expected to be self-sufficient, reliable, and available to help whenever someone else made a mess of things. Emily and I were never super close, mostly because of how differently we were treated. While I was working my ass off to pay for college and rent, my parents covered everything for her, including a brand new car at 16, full tuition, and an apartment in a nice part of the city after graduation. She never held a job for long because she knew she had a financial safety net. A few years ago, Emily met her now husband, Jake, 33M. From the start, I didn't like him. He had no job, no ambition, and seemed to be mooching off of whatever woman would tolerate him. When she introduced him to us, I could immediately tell he was the type to manipulate his way into someone's life and take advantage of their kindness. He was charming, sure, but there was something off about him. I tried to warn Emily. I told her to be careful, to not rush into anything and to make sure she wasn't being used. She called me jealous and accused me of trying to control her life. Our parents, of course, adored Jake because he knew exactly how to play the role of the perfect son-in-law. My mom even said, "I just have a feeling about him. He's going to take such good care of Emily." Fast forward to a year later, Emily and Jake got engaged. I sat her down and begged her to at least get a prenup. She laughed in my face and told me I was so cynical and that Jake wasn't like that. I gave up. It was clear she wasn't going to listen, and I was tired of always being the bad guy. They got married, and almost immediately, things started falling apart. Jake refused to get a job, spent all of Emily's money, and started making excuses for why he couldn't contribute financially. When Emily would bring it up, he'd gaslight her into thinking she was being materialistic and that love isn't about money. It took less than a year before she was completely financially supporting him while he sat at home doing nothing. Over time, he became controlling. He didn't want her going out with friends, would check her phone, and even started making comments about how she dressed too nice for a married woman. Again, I tried to intervene, but she brushed it off, claiming that he was just protective because he loved her so much. Then a few months ago, things hit rock bottom. Emily found out Jake had been cheating on her with multiple women. Not only that, but he had racked up massive credit card debt in her name and drained their shared savings account. He left her completely broke and humiliated. And the worst part? Because she didn't listen to me and refused a prenup, she's now stuck in a messy divorce where he's demanding spousal support. Suddenly, I'm the first person she calls. She's crying, saying she has nowhere to go, that she needs help with rent, groceries, and legal fees. Our parents helped at first, but they don't have unlimited resources, and now they're pressuring me to step in. They told me that this is what family is for, and that she's learned her lesson. I said no. I told Emily I warned her about Jake from the beginning, and she chose to ignore me. I told her I wasn't going to clean up a mess she willingly walked into, especially when she treated me like garbage for even trying to help before it all went to hell. Now everyone is calling me heartless. My parents say I'm punishing her for a mistake and that she's already suffering enough. Emily is devastated, calling me cruel and saying she never thought I'd turn my back on her like this. But I don't see why I should be expected to sacrifice my time, money, and energy for someone who never once listened to me and treated me like a villain when I tried to help. So, AITA for refusing to help her now? AITA for refusing to give my parents access to my savings after they used my name to take out a loan? I, 27M, grew up in a very financially unstable household. My parents, especially my dad, were never great with money. They were always living beyond their means, taking out loans they couldn't pay back, and expecting family members to bail them out. I can't count the number of times utilities were shut off when I was a kid because they forgot to pay the bill, even though they always had enough money for vacations or expensive gadgets. Because of this, I learned early on that I needed to be responsible for myself. I started working as soon as I legally could, saved every penny, and eventually got a good job in tech. I don't make a ridiculous amount, but I earn enough to live comfortably and have been aggressively saving for a house. My parents know I'm financially stable, but I've always been careful not to flaunt it. A few months ago, I started getting calls from a collections agency. At first, I ignored them because I don't have any debt. But when I finally picked up, they informed me that I owed over $25,000 on a personal loan. My heart dropped. I told them there had to be a mistake, but they had all my information, name, address, even my social security number. After a few days of panicking, pulling my credit reports, and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, I found out the truth. My parents had taken out the loan in my name. When I confronted them, they didn't even seem that ashamed. My dad actually had the audacity to say, "We needed the money, and you're young. You'll bounce back." My mom tried to justify it by saying they were planning to pay it back, and it's not like you were using your credit anyway. I completely lost it. I told them they had no right to do this and that they committed fraud. They both got defensive, saying I was being dramatic and that family helps family. My dad even said, "You should be thanking us for building your credit history." I immediately froze my credit, filed a police report, and started the process of disputing the loan. My parents freaked out when they realized I wasn't just going to roll over and let them get away with it. They begged me to drop it, saying that if they got charged with fraud, they could lose their house. I told them that wasn't my problem. Since then, the rest of the family has gotten involved. My uncle called me, saying I was being heartless, that I knew they were struggling, and should have just helped. My grandma, who I love dearly, called me crying, saying my parents made a mistake, but that I was being cruel by potentially sending them to jail. Even my younger sister, 22F, who I thought was on my side, told me I should have just worked something out with them instead of going nuclear. I feel like I'm going insane. They stole from me. They committed fraud. And yet, everyone is acting like I'm the villain for not just accepting it. Now my parents are saying that since I clearly have so much money, I should just give them access to my savings to pay off the loan and move on. That was the last straw. I told them they would never see a dime from me and that I hope they enjoy dealing with the consequences of their actions. Now, half my family isn't speaking to me, and the other half is calling me a selfish, ungrateful son who is punishing his parents over a little financial mistake. So, AITA for refusing to forgive them and refusing to give them access to my savings? AITA for refusing to let my neighbor use my car after she got her own repossessed? I, 35M, live in a suburban neighborhood where most people keep to themselves, but we still do the occasional wave and small talk. One of my neighbors, Lisa, 42F, moved in about 2 years ago, and from the start, she had this way of making her problems everyone else's. Lisa is a single mom with 2 teenage sons, and while I sympathize with how tough it could be, she's always had a habit of borrowing things from people in the neighborhood and being really entitled about it. At first, it was little things, asking to borrow a ladder and keeping it for 2 months, asking for eggs or milk, and never returning the favor. Then she started asking for bigger favors, like rides to work when her car was in the shop or watching her kids for just an hour that would turn into 4. I always try to be neighborly, but I also made sure to set firm boundaries. I work a demanding job, and when I'm home, I want to relax. I'm not interested in being someone's unpaid chauffeur or babysitter. Well, about 3 months ago, Lisa's car got repossessed. I don't know all the details, but I heard from another neighbor that she had stopped making payments and just assumed she'd figure out later. When it finally got taken, she started scrambling for a solution. She first asked a few neighbors for rides, but most of them made excuses after the first couple of times. Eventually, she came to me. Lisa knocked on my door and, in her usual overly friendly tone, asked if she could borrow my car for a few days until she figured things out. She assured me she'd only use it to drive to work and back, and she'd even put gas in it. I immediately said no. My car is my responsibility, and I wasn't about to hand it over to someone who had already proven she wasn't great at handling her own vehicle. Lisa acted like I was being unreasonable and tried to guilt-trip me. She said she was just trying to keep her job and support her kids, and she couldn't believe I wouldn't help out a struggling mother. I stood my ground and told her that I wasn't comfortable lending out my car, especially to someone who had just lost hers due to financial irresponsibility. She got really passive-aggressive and made some comment like, "Must be nice to be able to afford to be so selfish." Then she stormed off. I thought that was the end of it, but nope. She started a campaign against me in the neighborhood. Suddenly, people I barely spoke to were giving me weird looks, and I even heard from one of my other neighbors that Lisa was telling everyone I was a heartless jerk who refused to help a single mom in need. Then she escalated. A few days later, I noticed my car had been tampered with. Nothing serious, but someone had tried to open the door with something that left scratches near the handle. I have cameras on my property, so I checked the footage. Sure enough, there was Lisa in the middle of the night trying to get into my car. I was furious. I confronted her the next day with the footage, and instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She claimed she was just checking to see if it was unlocked because she thought she left something inside it, which made no sense because she had never been in my car. I told her if she ever came near my property again, I'd call the police. That finally shut her up, but now half the neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of villain for going after a struggling mother over a misunderstanding. Some of them think I should have just let her use the car to avoid all this drama, but I don't think I owe anyone access to my personal property just because they're struggling. So, AITA AITA for refusing to let my brother move in after he destroyed my first apartment. I, 29M, have always had a complicated relationship with my older brother, Mike, 34M. Growing up, he was the reckless one, constantly getting into trouble, while I was the responsible one who had to clean up his messes. Our parents enabled him, always excusing his behavior with boys will be boys and expecting me to be the bigger person whenever he did something to screw me over. For most of my life, I tolerated it. But 5 years ago, something happened that made me completely cut him off. Back then, I had just moved into my first apartment after years of saving. It wasn't anything fancy, just a decent one-bedroom place in a nice neighborhood. I was proud of it because I worked my ass off to afford it. At the time, Mike was going through a rough patch. He had lost his job. Again, his girlfriend had kicked him out, and he had nowhere to go. Our parents begged me to let him crash at my place for a little while. I was hesitant, but they guilt-tripped me with the whole he's family thing. I agreed on the condition that it was temporary, 1 month tops. Biggest mistake of my life. The first week, he was fine. But soon, he started treating my apartment like his personal frat house. He never cleaned up after himself, invited random friends over without asking, and even took over my bedroom while I was at work, leaving me to sleep on my own couch. He ran up my utility bills, ate all my food without replacing it, and didn't contribute a dime. Then it got worse. One night, I came home to find my apartment completely trashed. Mike had thrown a party while I was working late. There were beer bottles everywhere. My couch had a massive stain on it, which I later found out was vomit, and someone had shattered my coffee table. I was furious. I told him he needed to clean everything up, and that this was his final warning. He half-assed it, but at least things calmed down for about a week. Then came the final straw. One night, I got a call from my landlord while I was at work. He told me there had been a noise complaint, and that when he went to check, he found my front door wide open with a bunch of strangers inside. Mike wasn't even home. He had let his friends use my apartment as a hangout spot while he went off somewhere else. I left work immediately, drove home, and sure enough, my place was wrecked again. Worse, one of my neighbors told me they saw someone walking out with my gaming console. I checked, and yep, my PS4 and some other electronics were gone. I confronted Mike when he finally stumbled back in, and he just shrugged, saying, "Well, I didn't tell them to steal anything." That was it. I kicked him out right then and there. He whined about having nowhere to go, but I didn't care. I told him I wasn't responsible for him and that I was done. After he left, I had to deal with the fallout. My landlord almost evicted me. I had to replace the stolen items myself because Mike didn't have any money. I lost my security deposit because of the damages. The whole experience drained me financially and emotionally. I cut all contact with him after that. Our parents tried to get me to let it go, saying that Mike makes mistakes and that I was being too harsh. I told them that if they cared so much, they could let him live with them. Now, 5 years later, guess who's in trouble again? Mike just lost his job for the 4th time in as many years and is getting evicted. Our parents called me, saying he has nowhere else to go and that I should be the bigger person and let him stay with me until he gets back on his feet. I laughed and told them absolutely not. I reminded them of what happened last time and said I wasn't going through that again. They started with the guilt trips, family helps family. You're his only hope. How can you be so cold? I told them that Mike is a grown man who needs to deal with his own problems. They called me selfish and heartless, saying that as his brother, I should want to help him. I told them my answer was final. Now, most of my extended family is calling me a jerk. They're saying I'm punishing Mike for something that happened years ago and that people change. But I don't believe he's changed at all. He's just looking for another safety net. AITA for refusing to let him move in? AITA for refusing to let my parents move in after they gave my childhood home to my brother? I, 34M, grew up in a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandparents bought it, my dad inherited it, and that house was my whole childhood. I always thought my brother, Ethan, 30M, and I would eventually figure out a way to keep it in the family, especially since my parents always said they wanted it to be a legacy home. Our parents have never been particularly wealthy, but they were responsible with money. At least that's what I thought. I moved out at 19 to go to college, worked my way through, and eventually landed a solid job in IT. I met my now wife, bought a home, and built a stable life. Ethan, on the other hand, took a different path. He struggled with jobs, got into some bad financial situations, and always leaned on my parents to bail him out. A few years ago, I started hearing hints that my parents were thinking of selling the house. I was shocked, but they insisted it was just a thought. I offered to help financially if it meant keeping in the family, but they brushed it off, saying everything was fine. Then, out of nowhere, they called me and dropped the bomb. They weren't selling the house. They were giving it to Ethan. Just like that. No discussion. No offer for me to buy in or even split it. They just handed it over. I was stunned. When I asked why, they said Ethan needed a fresh start and that they wanted to make sure he had a stable place to live since he had been unlucky with jobs and relationships. They figured since I had a house and good job, I didn't need it. I won't lie, I was angry. Not because I wanted the house for myself, though I would have bought it if they had given me the chance, but because of the sheer unfairness. My parents raised us with the idea that the house was a family legacy, and then they just gave it away without even considering my input. I told them how betrayed I felt, but they dismissed it, saying I was being selfish for not supporting Ethan's new beginning. After that, I distanced myself. I didn't cut them off, but things were never the same. I visited less, called less, and stopped going out of my way to help when they needed things. It wasn't out of spite. I just felt like an afterthought in my own family. Fast forward to last month. My parent called me and, in a very different tone, told me they were struggling. Turns out, giving away the house wasn't just a generous gesture. They were also in debt. Without the house, they had no real assets, and they had burned through most of their savings. Now, they couldn't afford rent and wanted to know if they could move in with me temporarily. I asked why they couldn't stay with Ethan, since he now owned the house. Apparently, Ethan had sold it less than a year after getting it. He needed the money and figured my parents would be fine since they were still working. But now they weren't working. They had retired early, thinking they'd be okay, only to realize too late that their financial plan had been built on nothing. I told them no. I reminded them that they made their decision, and now they had to live with it. They tried to guilt me, saying family takes care of each other, and that they never thought I'd turn my back on them. I told them I wasn't turning my back on them. I was just respecting the choices they made. Now, I'm being painted as the cruel son who abandoned his parents. Relatives have been reaching out, telling me I should reconsider and that family is more important than pride. But I don't think this is about pride. They chose Ethan over me, and now they want me to clean up the mess? AITA for refusing to let them move in? AITA for refusing to pay for my dad's medical bills after he disowned me? I, 30M, grew up in a very traditional and, frankly, strict household. My dad, 60M, was the kind of father who believed in absolute authority. He made all the decisions, and whatever he said was final. My mom mostly stayed quiet and went along with whatever he wanted. When I was a teenager, it became clear that I wasn't the son my father wanted. He expected me to be into sports, cars, and manly things, but I was more into books, computers, and music. He constantly belittled me, calling me soft or weak whenever I showed any emotion. It only got worse when I came out as bisexual at 18. That was the final straw for him. He completely lost it when I told him. He yelled at me, called me disgusting, and said I was an embarrassment to the family. He told me I was no longer his son and that I had 24 hours to get out of his house. My mom just cried in the corner, saying nothing. I left with a backpack of clothes and my laptop, and that was it. For the next 12 years, I built a life without them. I struggled a lot in the beginning, couch surfing, working crappy jobs, but I eventually got through college with scholarships and landed a great job in IT. Over the years, I tried reaching out to my mom a few times, but it was always the same response. Your father still isn't ready to talk. Eventually, I stopped trying. Fast forward to 3 months ago. I got a call from an unknown number. It was my mom. She sounded nervous, but told me that my dad had suffered a stroke and that the medical bills were piling up. She said they were struggling financially and needed help. Then she hit me with, "Your father wants to see you." I was stunned. This was the man who kicked me out with nothing, who refused to acknowledge my existence for over a decade. And now that he needed something, he suddenly wanted to talk? I told her I'd think about it. After a few days, I decided to visit, not because I forgave him, but because I needed closure. When I got there, he was in a wheelchair, looking weaker than I'd ever seen him. But the moment he saw me, his face twisted in disgust. He muttered something about how I still looked the same, and how he had hoped I'd grown out of that phase. I realized right then that he hadn't changed at all. He didn't want to reconnect. He just wanted my money. My mom confirmed it when she pulled me aside and said, "I know he hasn't been the best father, but we really need your help." I told her no. She started crying, saying they didn't have insurance, that they were drowning in debt, that my father couldn't work anymore. I told her I was sorry for her situation, but I owed them nothing. That's when my dad wheeled himself into the room and said, "I knew you'd be selfish. You were always a disappointment." I laughed. I told him he was right. I was done being a disappointment to him. And then I walked out. Since then, my family has been blowing up my phone. My mom sends me messages every few days, saying things like, "He's still your father," and "Don't let your anger make you cruel." My uncle called me and told me I was heartless for leaving them to suffer when I could easily help. Even my cousin, who barely spoke to me before, sent a long text about how families should take care of each other no matter what. The thing is, I could afford to help them. I have savings. I make a good salary. But the thought of giving a single cent to the man who threw me away makes me sick. Now, some of my friends are saying I should be the bigger person, that I should do it for my mom since she was just following my dad's lead. Others say I have every right to cut them off. So, AITA for refusing to pay for my dad's medical bills after he disowned me. AITA for refusing to give my coworker my vacation days after she used all of hers. I, 38M, work for a mid-sized company that has a fairly generous PTO policy. We get a set number of vacation days per year, and while we can roll a limited amount over, once you're out, you're out. Everyone is responsible for managing their own time. One of my coworkers, Claire, 42F, is a single mom with 3 kids. I won't pretend I understand how hard that is, but from the moment she joined our department 2 years ago, she has always had issues with time off. She constantly runs out of PTO by mid-year due to various family emergencies, sick days, and school events. Every time, she complains about how unfair it is that PTO isn't need-based. Now, I'm someone who carefully plans my time off. I don't take many sick days, and I make sure I have enough vacation left for the holidays and an annual trip I take with my wife. I use my PTO responsibly, and I don't let it go to waste. Last month, Claire hit 0 PTO again. She started venting to everyone about how she had nothing left for emergencies and was so stressed about what she was going to do. At first, it was just complaining, but then she started hinting that someone should give her some of their days. She even mentioned how at her old job, people could donate PTO to co-workers in need. I ignored it because her company doesn't do that. But then she came to me directly. She told me she knew I had plenty of PTO left and asked if I would be willing to give her some of my days so she could have a buffer for emergencies. I told her that's not how our policy works. She said she knew that, but maybe if I asked our boss, an exception could be made. I told her no. I said I worked hard for my vacation days, and I wasn't going to give them up. She looked shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually refuse. Then she launched into a whole speech about how I don't have kids, how I don't need that much time off, and how it would barely impact me, but would make a huge difference for her. I shut that down immediately. I told her that my time off is mine, and I wasn't about to give up something I earned just because she didn't manage hers properly. She got upset and walked away. Since then, she's been acting like a martyr. She sighs dramatically when I walk by, makes passive-aggressive comments about how some people just don't understand real responsibility, and even told another coworker that she hopes I never have to learn what it's like to be a struggling parent. Some coworkers think she's being ridiculous, but a few have said I could have helped her out, and it wouldn't have hurt me that much. They argue that I know she's struggling, and I chose to be selfish instead. I don't feel bad about my decision, but the guilt tripping is starting to get to me. So, AITA for refusing to give up my vacation days? AITA for refusing to give my sister my apartment after she made fun of me for years? I, 28M, have an older sister, Claire, 33F, who has always been the favorite. Ever since we were kids, my parents put her on a pedestal She was the golden child who could do no wrong. She was the star athlete, the straight-A student, the one who got all the attention at family gatherings. Meanwhile, there was the quiet, awkward kid who was just expected to go with the flow. Growing up, Claire loved to make fun of me. She called me a loser for being into video games and comics, mocked me for not having many friends, and constantly joked that I'd be living in my parents' basement forever. She got even worse in high school, calling me pathetic for not dating and making fun of my choice to go into IT instead of something impressive. My parents always brushed it off as sibling teasing, but it made my teenage years miserable. I moved out at 20 after landing a decent job in tech. Over the years, I worked hard, saved aggressively, and finally bought my first apartment last year. It's not huge, but it's mine. I love my space, I keep it neat, and for the first time in my life, I feel truly independent. Claire, on the other hand, took a different path. She married her high school sweetheart at 23, had 2 kids, and became a stay-at-home mom while her husband, Mark, worked. A few months ago, Claire and Mark hit a rough patch. Mark lost his job, and they started struggling financially. They had to downsize to a smaller rental, and Claire, who always acted like she was above everyone else, started panicking about money. She called our parents for help, and of course, they coddled her, giving her money whenever she asked. But it wasn't enough. Then, last month, my parents called me over for dinner. Claire was there, and after some small talk, my mom said, "Honey, we need to talk about something important." That's when they dropped the bombshell. They wanted me to give my apartment to Claire and her family so they could get back on their feet. I was stunned. I asked if they were serious, and Claire jumped in, saying, "It's just an apartment. You don't need it the way we do. You don't even have a family to support." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them my apartment wasn't some spare property. It was my home. I worked my ass off for years to afford it, and I wasn't just going to hand it over. My dad sighed and said, "Come on, son. You can always get another place later." But Claire's kids need stability. I said no. Claire lost it. She started ranting about how I was being selfish, how I didn't understand what it was like to struggle, and how I was letting my stupid grudge from childhood get in the way of helping my family. My mom got teary-eyed and said, "We just thought you'd want to do the right thing." I told them I wasn't responsible for Claire's poor life choices. She and her husband were adults, and they needed to figure it out without taking my home from me. I left, furious, and went no contact for a few weeks. Since then, Claire's been on a campaign to make me look like the worst person in the world. She's told extended family that I'm hoarding space while her children suffer. She's posted passive-aggressive things on Facebook about selfish people who forget where they came from. Even my parents keep calling, begging me to reconsider. But I'm standing firm. I spent years being treated like I was nothing. Now that I have something for myself, I'm not about to hand it over just because Claire thinks she's more deserving. AITA for refusing to give my sister my apartment? AITA for refusing to pay my friend's vet bill after she ignored my warning about my dog? I, 31M, have a German shepherd named Rex. He's well-trained, super obedient, and has never shown aggression toward anyone. Asterisk as long as people follow my rules when they interact with him star. I've had him since he was a puppy, and I invested a lot of time into his training because I know large dogs, especially his breed, can be intimidating to people who don't know them. One of the rules I always tell people is do not take anything out of his mouth. If he has something he shouldn't, I have a command to get him to drop it safely. Try to take something from him by force makes him think it's a game, and he might clamp down harder. He's never bitten anyone, but I always emphasize that it's not a good idea to reach into his mouth. Now, my friend Sarah, 29F, has never been a huge fan of dogs, but she tolerates them. She comes over sometimes and has always been a little weird around Rex. Never hostile, but also not listening when I tell her the best way to interact with him. She's one of those people who thinks she knows better because she grew up with a family dog that was a lazy golden retriever and assumes all dogs are the same. A few weeks ago, Sarah came over for a movie night. I had just given Rex one of his favorite chew toys, a heavy-duty rubber ball he loves. We were sitting on the couch when, out of nowhere, Sarah got up, walked over to Rex, and tried to take the ball out of his mouth. I saw it happen in slow motion. Rex immediately reacted by clamping down, asterisk not biting asterisk, just holding onto his toy tighter, which is exactly what I said he would do if someone tried to take something from him by force. Sarah yelped and yanked her hand away, and in doing so, she scraped her finger against his tooth. It was barely more than a scratch. There was a little blood, but nothing serious. She ran to the sink, freaking out, and I grabbed the first aid kit. I tried to tell her she was fine, but she was shaking and acting like Rex had attacked her. She left soon after, still rattled, and I thought that was the end of it. But 2 days later, I got a furious text from her, saying that she had gone to urgent care, and they made her get a tetanus shot and antibiotics. Apparently, she told the doctor she had been bitten by a German shepherd, which made them extra cautious. Now, she was demanding that I pay her medical bill, which she claimed was only fair since it was my dog that bit her. I refused immediately. I reminded her that 1. Rex didn't bite her. She hurt herself by ignoring my very clear rule. 2. I warned her multiple times about taking things from his mouth. 3. She escalated the situation herself by jerking her hand away, which caused the scratch. She lost it, saying that I was being a horrible friend and that a responsible dog owner would have offered to help. I told her a responsible person wouldn't have ignored the warning I gave her. Now, she's gone full victim mode, telling our mutual friends that I have a dangerous dog and that I refuse to take responsibility. A few of them think I should just pay the bill to smooth things over, but I don't think I should be financially responsible for someone else's mistake, especially when I explicitly warned her. So, AITA for refusing to pay. AITA for refusing to give my coworker my inheritance, even though she needs it more. I, 31M, lost my grandfather last year. He was one of the only people in my family I was truly close to. My parents and I have a strained relationship, but my grandfather was always there for me. He taught me how to fix cars, encouraged me in school, and even helped me out financially when I was struggling in my early 20s. When he passed, I was devastated. He left behind a small estate, and in his will, he left me his house and a decent sum of money. Not life-changing, but enough to give me some financial security. My parents weren't happy about it, but they didn't contest it. My grandfather made it clear that he wanted me to have it. I work at a mid-sized company, and I have a co-worker, Lisa, 33F, who I've always gotten along with until now. Lisa is a single mom of 3 kids. She's always talked about how hard things are financially, how her ex doesn't pay child support, and how she's struggling to keep up with rent. I sympathized, but there wasn't much I could do. A few weeks ago, during lunch, some coworkers were talking about financial stress, and someone asked me how I was holding up with everything after my grandfather's passing. I mentioned that I inherited his house and some money, but that I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet. I didn't go into details, just a casual mention. Lisa's ears practically perked up. She started asking me questions. How much money? What was I planning to do with the house? Was I planning on selling it? I gave vague answers because I didn't feel comfortable discussing it in detail. Then, a few days later, Lisa approached me privately and asked if I would consider giving her some of my inheritance. I was stunned. She went on about how hard it was raising 3 kids alone, how I was lucky to have gotten such a gift, and how it would mean the world if I could help her out. I told her I was sorry for what she was going through, but my grandfather left that money to me for a reason, and I wasn't in a position to just give it away. She looked shocked, then said, "Wow, I didn't expect you to be so selfish." Since then, she's been passive-aggressive at work. She makes comments like, "Must be nice not to have to worry about bills," or "Some of us don't have a safety net to fall back on." I've overheard her telling other coworkers that I'm hoarding money while she and her kids are struggling. A few coworkers have started acting weird toward me, and one even asked if I'd really denied helping a single mother. I don't think I owe her anything. My grandfather worked hard for what he had, and he wanted me to have it. But now I'm starting to wonder if I should have handled it differently. AITA for refusing to give Lisa part of my inheritance? AITA for refusing to cover for my coworker after she constantly dumped her work on me? I, 33M, work in a corporate office in a department where teamwork is essential. I have been at this company for almost 8 years, and I take my job seriously. I don't mind helping out when needed, but I believe in fairness. Unfortunately, my coworker, Megan, 29F, does not share that mindset. Megan was hired about a year and a half ago. At first, she seemed great, friendly, personable, and eager to learn. But within a few months, I noticed a pattern. She had a habit of conveniently forgetting deadlines, missing meetings, or suddenly being overwhelmed right before a project was due. Each time, she would come to me, acting flustered and stressed, asking if I could just help her out this one time. At first, I did. I figured she was still adjusting, and I didn't want to be the jerk who refused to help a new coworker. But it quickly became obvious that this wasn't about adjusting. This was about getting out of work. Whenever there was a task she didn't like, she would somehow manage to shift it onto me. If our manager asked her for an update, she'd say something vague like, "Oh, OP was actually handling that part, I think, even if I had never agreed to it." If I confronted her, she would act innocent, saying things like, "Oh, I just assumed since you're so good at this stuff, it made sense for you to do it." I started setting firm boundaries. I stopped accepting extra work from her, and if she tried to push something on me in a meeting, I would immediately clarify that it was her responsibility. She didn't like that. She started making snide comments about how I was so rigid and how she believed in helping the team. Then, 2 weeks ago, she really screwed herself over. We had a big quarterly report due, one that required gathering data, formatting it properly, and presenting it to leadership. Megan was assigned to lead it, but of course, she barely did any work. Every time someone asked about progress, she'd brush it off, saying she had everything under control. The day before it was due, she showed up at my desk looking panicked. She had nothing done. She tried to play the victim, saying she had been so overwhelmed with other tasks. Not true. Our workloads were the same, and she knew she should have asked for help earlier, but she just knew I could fix it quickly since I was so good at this kind of thing. I cut her off and said, "No, this is your responsibility. You had weeks to do this." She stared at me like I had slapped her. She kept insisting that she would owe me one, but I refused. I told her that I wasn't going to bail her out, and she needed to take ownership of her work. She stormed off, clearly furious. The next day, in a leadership meeting, she completely flopped. She tried to present, but it was obvious she hadn't prepared. When our manager asked why the report was incomplete, she tried to throw me under the bus, saying, "Well, OP was supposed to help, but I guess there was a miscommunication." Before a manager could even turn to me, I immediately shut that down. I calmly said, "That's not true. Megan was assigned this report. She never asked for my help until yesterday." At which point, I reminded her it was her responsibility. Our manager was not happy. Megan stammered through the rest of the meeting, and afterward, she was pulled into a one-on-one with the boss. I don't know exactly what was said, but she looked pissed when she came out. Since then, she has been cold to me, barely speaking unless necessary. Some of my other coworkers have hinted that I was too harsh and that I could have just helped to avoid drama. But I think that would have just set a precedent that she could keep using me whenever she felt like slacking off. So, AITA for refusing to cover for her? AITA for refusing to let my mom move in after she kicked me out at 18? I, 29M, grew up with a single mother, and to put it bluntly, she wasn't great at parenting. She had me young, and while I understand that must have been hard, she never really seemed to want me around. She was always chasing after some new boyfriend, partying, or spending money she didn't have on things she didn't need. I spent most of my childhood feeling like an afterthought. She never saved a dime, never planned for the future, and certainly never put anything away for my college education. By the time I was 16, I was already working part-time jobs just to have my own money, since asking her for anything usually led to a lecture about how she wasn't made of cash. When I turned 18, she sat me down and told me, with zero emotion, that it was time for me to be a man and that I had a month to move out. She wanted to downsize and live her life without worrying about a kid anymore. That was it. No support, no transition, just a shove out the door. I had nowhere to go. I wasn't prepared. I had to crash on a friend's couch while scrambling to find a full-time job. College went out the window. I couldn't afford it. It took years of grinding, working 2 jobs, and saving every penny to finally build a stable life for myself. Now, at 29, I have a good job, a house that I work my ass off for, and a fiancé. Life is good. I rarely spoke to my mom over the years, mostly because she never made an effort to reach out. She was too busy traveling, dating different guys, and enjoying her freedom. Then 2 months ago, I got a call from her out of the blue. She was crying, saying she was in trouble. Turns out, she made some bad financial decisions, shocking, I know, and lost her apartment. She had no savings, no job, and no one to turn to. She asked if she could move in with me, just for a little while, until she got back on her feet. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I asked her if she remembered what she told me when I turned 18. She got quiet, then said, "That was different. I was young and struggling. You have a home. You can afford to help." I told her no, that she made her choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences, just like I had to when she threw me out with nothing. She started crying, calling me cruel, saying that a son should take care of his mother. I told her that a mother should take care of her son, but she didn't, so I don't owe her anything. Then I hung up. Since then, I've been getting messages from relatives, most of whom I haven't spoken to in years, telling me I'm heartless and that family is family. My mom apparently told everyone that I'm leaving her homeless out of pure spite. A few people said she made a mistake when she kicked me out and that I should be the bigger person. But I don't see it that way. She wasn't a parent to me. She made it clear I was a burden, and now that she needs something, she suddenly wants to act like family matters? No. AITA for refusing to let her move in. AITA for refusing to let my sister move in after she sold her childhood home. I, 36M, have an older sister, Laura, 40F, and we had a decent relationship growing up. We weren't particularly close, but we got along well enough. Our parents passed away in a car accident about 6 years ago, which was devastating. They left behind our childhood home, a modest but well-kept house in a nice neighborhood. Since Laura was older and had always been our parents' favorite, they left the house to her in the will, with the understanding that it would remain in the family. At the time, I wasn't particularly upset about it. I had already bought my own home with my wife, and I had no intention of moving back. Laura, on the other hand, was renting an apartment, so inheriting the house was a huge financial benefit for her. She told me she was grateful and that she planned to live there long term. I believed her. Fast forward to last year. Out of nowhere, Laura called to tell me she had sold the house. She didn't need the money. She was doing fine financially, but she had met a guy, decided to move in with him, and didn't want the responsibility of maintaining the house anymore. She said she had thought about renting it out, but ultimately decided that selling was just easier. I was shocked. I reminded her that our parents had wanted the house to stay in the family, but she shrugged it off, saying things change. I was angry, but ultimately let it go because, legally, it was her decision to make. Well, guess what? The relationship didn't work out. She and her boyfriend broke up about 6 months ago, and she's been bouncing between short-term rentals ever since. Now, she's suddenly acting like we're so close and has been hinting for weeks that she's struggling financially. Finally, she came right out and asked if she could move in with me and my wife for a few months while she gets back on her feet. I told her no. She looked completely taken aback and asked why. I told her that she had a fully paid-off home and chose to sell it for convenience, despite knowing that it was our parents' wish for it to stay in the family. That was her decision, and she had to live with it. She immediately started guilt-tripping me, saying she had no one else to turn to and that family helps family. I told her that I am helping her by forcing her to take responsibility for her choices. I reminded her that I have a wife, a home, and responsibilities of my own, and I'm not obligated to clean up her mess just because she made a bad decision. She flipped out, calling me cold and selfish, saying our parents would be ashamed of me for turning my back on my own sister. I told her that maybe they would be ashamed, but not of me. Now, she's been telling extended family that I abandoned her when she needed help, and some of them are taking her side, saying I should let her stay because she's my sister and has nowhere to go. But she had somewhere to go until she sold it. AITA for refusing to let her move in. AITA for refusing to help my cousin after he ruined my life years ago. I, 30M, grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other and family was everything. My cousin Matt, 32M, was always treated like the golden boy. He was charming, athletic, and could do no wrong in the eyes of our family. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, bookish kid who mostly kept to myself. Even as children, Matt had a way of getting out of trouble by flashing a smile and blaming someone else, usually me. The worst incident happened when we were in high school. I had always been a straight A student, hoping to go to a good college on a scholarship. Matt, on the other hand, barely put in any effort. He partied, skipped classes, and somehow always avoided serious consequences. One day, he came to me in a panic, saying he had messed up and needed my help. He had been caught plagiarizing a major paper, and if he got one more strike, he would be expelled. He begged me to take the fall for him, saying that since I was a good kid, the school would go easier on me. I refused. I told him he needed to own up to his mistake. I thought that was the end of it. A few days later, I was called into the principal's office. Someone had anonymously reported me for academic dishonesty. They had evidence, a copy of the plagiarized paper in my handwriting. I was completely blindsided. It didn't take me long to realize that Matt had set me up. I tried to defend myself, but the school had a zero-tolerance policy. Since Matt's name was never mentioned, I was the one who got suspended. My spotless record was ruined. When I confronted Matt, he shrugged and said, "Sorry, man. I had to do what I had to do." Then he had the nerve to say I should be grateful I only got suspended instead of expelled. I was furious, but when I told my parents, they brushed it off as boys being boys. My mom even said, "You'll bounce back. Don't hold a grudge over one mistake." That one mistake destroyed my chances at getting into my dream school. The suspension was a black mark on my record, and my scholarship applications were rejected. Instead of going to an elite university, I had to attend a much smaller state college and take out loans. Meanwhile, Matt graduated on time, went off to a good school because his parents could afford to send him anywhere, and never faced any consequences. I distanced myself from him and most of my family after that. I moved to a new city, worked my way up in my career, and built a good life for myself. I barely spoke to Matt over the years, and honestly, I didn't care to. Then last month, out of nowhere, I got a message from him. At first, I thought it was a joke. He was reaching out because he needed a favor. Turns out, his life hadn't gone as smoothly as he expected. He bounced between jobs, had a failed marriage, and was now struggling financially. He said he had heard I was doing well and wanted to know if I could lend him some money to get back on his feet. I ignored the message. Then I got another, and another. Finally, he called me. He tried to act like nothing had happened, like we were long-lost brothers catching up. I cut him off and asked why he really reached out. He sighed and admitted he was desperate. He had lost his job, was behind on rent, and was at risk of losing his apartment. He said he knew I was successful now and that family helps family. I laughed. I told him that family helps family unless that family screws you over for their own gain. I reminded him of what he did to me in high school, how his selfishness cost me my future, how I had to take on massive debt while he skated through life. He had the nerve to say, "Come on, man, that was years ago. Are you really still mad about that?" I told him I owed him nothing and hung up. Since then, I've been getting calls and messages from relatives saying I'm being cruel. My mom called and said I needed to let the past go and be the bigger person. My aunt, Matt's mom, left a long voicemail about how Matt had made mistakes but was still family and that I was heartless for turning my back on him. But I don't see it that way. He made his choices. He threw me under the bus when it suited him, and now that he needs help, he suddenly wants to play the family card? No. AITA for refusing to help him? AITA for refusing to give my brother a share of my business after he mocked me for years? I, 35M, have an older brother, Jake, 38M. Growing up, we weren't particularly close. He was always the golden child in our family, athletic, popular, and effortlessly charming. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, nerdy one who spent more time with computers than people. Our parents doted on Jake and constantly made excuses for him when he slacked off, while I was expected to be the responsible one. One of the biggest sources of tension between us was my interest in tech. I was obsessed with programming and spent most of my free time learning to code. Jake constantly made fun of me for it. He called me a loser, a geek, and told me I'd never amount to anything. He'd tell me to get outside and be normal, instead of wasting time on stupid computer stuff. Our parents never corrected him. They thought it was all in good fun and even laughed along sometimes. When it came time for college, my parents bent over backward to support Jake. He wanted to be an athlete, but after bouncing between majors and eventually dropping out, he ended up doing odd jobs while living at home. Meanwhile, I worked my way through school with scholarships and part-time jobs because my parents said I was smart enough to figure out on my own. I didn't complain. I just kept my head down and focused on my future. Fast forward to my mid-20s. After graduating with a degree in computer science, I worked at a tech startup for a few years, gained experience, and then took the plunge into starting my own software development company. The first few years were rough, but I poured everything I had into it. Time, money, energy. I barely slept, took huge risks, and eventually it paid off. My company took off, and now, almost a decade later, I have a successful business with a solid team and a comfortable life. Jake, on the other hand, has spent the last decade job hopping and never really finding his footing. He still relies on our parents for financial support, even though he's almost 40. He's always had an excuse: bad luck, bad bosses, bad economy, but never takes accountability. He still treats me like the same nerdy little brother he used to pick on, even though our lives are drastically different now. The real issue started a few months ago. Jake suddenly started acting very interested in my work. He never once cared about my company before, but out of nowhere, he started asking questions, trying to sound supportive. At first, I thought maybe he was just trying to be a better brother. Then, he dropped the bombshell. He wanted a job at my company. Not just any job, either. He wanted a leadership role. I was floored. I told him that I didn't have any positions that fit his skill set, which, to be honest, is almost non-existent when it comes to tech. He brushed that off and said he didn't need to know programming. He could handle big-picture stuff like strategy and management. When I asked what experience he had in those areas, he just laughed and said, "Come on, man, it's not that hard. You figured it out, didn't you?" That pissed me off. I told him that yes, I did figure it out by working my ass off for years, making sacrifices and taking risks when no one believed in me. I reminded him of all the times he mocked me for my interests, treated me like a joke, and acted like I was wasting my life. Now that I was successful, suddenly he wanted to be a part of it. He got defensive and said I was holding a grudge over childhood stuff, and that families should help each other out. I told him that respect isn't a childhood grudge, it's the bare minimum. He never supported me, never believed in me, and now he expected me to hand him a role in something I built from the ground up? Absolutely not. He stormed off and later texted me a long rant about how I was being selfish and letting money change me. Our parents got involved, saying I should be the bigger person and give him a chance. I told them that Jake had plenty of chances in life, and he squandered all of them. This business was my life's work, and I wasn't about to hand a piece of it to someone who never respected me or what I do. Now, some family members are saying I'm being too harsh, that he's still my brother, and I should help him get back on his feet. But to me, this isn't about charity, it's about principle. He never believed in me until it benefited him, and I refused to reward that behavior. So, AITA for refusing to give him a job? AITA for refusing to let my brother move in with me after he lost his job and his apartment? I, 28M, have always been really close with my brother, 25M. We grew up in a small town where our parents were supportive, but they were never really around much due to work, so we had to figure a lot of things out for ourselves. We've had our fair share of disagreements, but we've always had each other's backs, and that's something I've always taken pride in. A couple of months ago, my brother lost his job at a tech startup. It was sudden, and to be honest, I don't think he was fully prepared for it. He had been living paycheck to paycheck for a while, and the job market for his field isn't exactly thriving in our area. He didn't have much saved up, and after a few weeks of searching for a new job, he started missing rent payments. His landlord got tired of waiting for him to pay and told him he'd have to leave the apartment. Since then, he's been couch surfing between friends and family. Now, here's where I come in. About 3 weeks ago, my brother called me and said he had nowhere else to stay and needed a place to live. I own a 2-bedroom apartment that I've lived in for the past 2 years, and while it's not huge, it's enough space for me. At first, I said I'd think about it. My apartment isn't really set up for 2 people. My second bedroom is more an office, and I don't have a couch or a pull-out bed to offer him. I told him I'd consider it. but it would be cramped. After a few days, he reached out again, saying he couldn't find anywhere else and really needed a place to stay, even if it was temporary. I felt bad for him, so I agreed to let him stay for a month or so while he figured things out. I told him he'd need to contribute to the bills, even if it was just a small amount. I didn't want him to freeload, but I also didn't want him to be on the streets. He agreed, and I thought everything was set. He moved in about 2 weeks ago, and almost immediately, things started to feel off. He didn't help with chores like he said he would. I'd come home after a long day at work, and the dishes would be piled up, the garbage would be overflowing, and the bathroom looked like it hadn't been touched in days. I'd ask him to take care of things, and he'd promise to do them, but then nothing would happen. I even bought extra cleaning supplies to make it easier, but he'd use them and leave everything as it was. It wasn't just the cleaning. He started eating my food without asking. I'm not the type of person to micromanage someone in my space, but I do expect basic respect when it comes to personal property. I'd buy groceries and come home to find that half of what I bought was gone. I'd ask him about it, and he'd give me some excuse like I was hungry or I thought we were sharing. I've never been one to mind sharing, but I do think there should be some level of communication when it comes to food, especially if you're not paying for it. I never asked him to pay for groceries, but I did expect him to buy his own food if he was going to be eating mine. The final straw came last week. I was planning to go out of town for a weekend trip to visit some friends. I told him about it a week in advance and asked him to keep things in order while I was gone. I didn't expect him to throw a party or trash the place, but I also didn't expect him to leave the apartment in the state it was when I got back. The dishes were piled up even higher. There was garbage all over the floor, and when I went to the fridge, I found that he had eaten everything, including the food I had specifically prepped for the trip. I was livid. I called him immediately and told him that I couldn't keep living like this. I told him that it wasn't working out and that I didn't think it was healthy for either of us to continue living together. He got defensive, accusing me of being cold and unhelpful. He said that I was kicking him out at a time when he was struggling and that I was being selfish. He even said that I should be doing more to help him get back on his feet and that I should understand what he was going through. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that he was being disrespectful in my space. I told him that I had done what I could, but it was clear that he wasn't making an effort to improve things. I told him that he had to find somewhere else to stay, and he could come back once he had his situation sorted out. He begged me to let him stay for a little longer, but I stuck to my decision. Since then, he hasn't spoken to me much. Our parents are mad at me, saying that I should have been more patient, and that family is supposed to help each other. They think I should have been more understanding of his situation, especially with him losing his job. They've even called me selfish for not offering more help, and I'm starting to feel guilty about it. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother continue staying with me after everything that happened? I'm feeling torn because I do want to help him, but I also don't think I should have to sacrifice my own comfort and well-being in the process. AITA for not giving my friend a loan after she repeatedly made irresponsible financial decisions. I, 30M, have a friend, Emily, 28F, who I've known for over 10 years. We've been through a lot together, and for the most part, I consider her a close friend. That being said, she's always had this pattern of making incredibly poor financial decisions, and it started to strain our friendship. Emily comes from a family that's been financially comfortable, and she never had to worry much about money growing up. She never learned how to manage it properly because, frankly, she never had to. Her parents always bailed her out when she got into financial trouble, and when she moved out on her own, they continued to help her out whenever she needed it. When we were in our mid-20s, she started getting into the habit of buying things she couldn't afford. At first, it was small things, a new phone, a designer purse, a night out with friends. But over time, it escalated. She started racking up credit card debt, taking out personal loans, and constantly asking people for money when she couldn't pay off her bills. I'd always try to help her out when she came to me, but there was a pattern. She'd promise to pay me back and then never do it. The first time she asked for a loan was a couple of years ago. She told me that she needed a few $1,000s to cover an emergency car repair. I knew it was a bit of a stretch, but I lent her the money, hoping she'd learn a lesson from previous mistakes. She promised she'd pay me back in a couple of months, and I didn't think much of it. A couple of months turned into 6 months, then a year, and she still hadn't paid me back. When I asked about it, she got defensive and made excuses. Her car broke down again, she needed money for rent, or she'd just forgotten because she was so busy with work. I let it slide because I wanted to maintain the friendship. But then came the second time. She came to me again, saying she needed another loan. This time, it was for vacation. She'd booked a trip to Europe with some friends and didn't have enough money for the flights. She claimed she'd save up after the vacation and pay me back right away, but I was skeptical. I told her I wasn't comfortable lending her money again, especially after the first time. She was upset, but I stood my ground. After a few days, she backed off, and I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. She started to ask me for smaller amounts of money, just $100 here and there for groceries, gas, or a night out. I'd given sometimes, but it started to feel like she was taking advantage of me. Each time I gave her money, I'd ask if she could pay me back soon, but the answer was always the same: I'll get it to you as soon as I can. Fast forward to last month. Emily called me in a panic. She told me that she was facing eviction because she couldn't pay her rent. She explained that she'd fallen behind on payments due to some unexpected expenses. Her car broke down again, and she had to buy a new laptop for work because her old one just stopped working. She was asking me for $5,000 to cover her rent, and in return, she promised she'd pay me back by the end of the month. I was furious. At this point, I'd already lent her over $3,000 in total, and she still hadn't paid me back cent. I knew that if I gave her this loan, it would just be the same cycle all over again. She'd promised to pay me back, and I'd never see the money again. I told her I couldn't help her, and I needed her to take responsibility for her own financial situation. She got angry and accused me of not being a real friend and being selfish. She said that if I really cared about her, I'd help her out in her time of need. I explained that it wasn't about not caring. It was about the fact that she had consistently made poor financial decisions and expected others to bail her out. I told her that I was tired of being taken advantage of and that she needed to learn how to manage her money like an adult. The conversation ended with her telling me that I was unsympathetic and cold-hearted. She hasn't spoken to me since, and I've heard from a few mutual friends that she's been bad-mouthing me behind my back. They say I'm being unreasonable and that I should have helped her because she's in a crisis. I feel conflicted. On the one hand, I do care about Emily, and I know that she's struggling, but on the other hand, I've been burned so many times that I don't feel like I owe her anything. I've tried to help her by giving advice on how to handle her finances, but she's never listened. I can't keep enabling her bad habits, especially when it's clear she hasn't learned any lessons from her past mistakes. So, AITA for refusing to give her a loan after all the time she's taken advantage of me. AITA for not letting my friend bring her kids to my child-free wedding after she insisted. I, 29F, have been friends with Rachel, 30F, for over 10 years. We met in college, and despite having very different personalities, we clicked right away. She's outgoing, bubbly, and always the life of the party, while I'm more reserved, introverted, and like my quiet time. Over the years, we've had our ups and downs, but we've always managed to stay close. Rachel got married a few years ago and had a big, family-oriented wedding with kids everywhere, which was totally her vibe. She has 2 young kids, a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter, and they are her whole world. I recently got engaged to my fiancé, Mark, 31M, and we decided to have a small, intimate wedding with only close friends and family. We wanted it to be a peaceful day with no distractions, which is why we made the decision early on to have a child-free wedding. It wasn't because we don't like kids or don't care about Rachel's kids. We just felt that for our special day, we wanted to keep the focus on the ceremony and the adult guests. We both agreed on this, and our families were understanding. Most of my friends were on board, but when I told Rachel about it, she was upset. At first, she tried to be polite about it, saying she understood, but I could tell she wasn't happy. A few days later, she texted me, asking if there was any way I would reconsider or if I could make an exception for her kids. She said she couldn't afford a sitter and didn't want to leave her kids with anyone else, as she trusted very few people to watch them. I told her that while I understood her situation, the decision was made, and the wedding was going to be child-free. I explained that it was a personal choice, and it wasn't meant to target her or her kids. It was just the kind of atmosphere we wanted for our wedding. She was not happy with my response and started texting me more frequently, trying to argue her case. She said things like, "It's not like they're disruptive kids, and you know how much I've been there for you over the years. I thought you'd make an exception for me." I felt really bad because I do value our friendship, but at the same time, I knew this was a line I wasn't willing to cross. I reiterated that it wasn't personal, and we couldn't make exceptions for anyone. After that, she seemed to accept it and told me she'd figure something out. I thought that was the end of it, but then a couple of weeks ago, she dropped a bombshell on me. She told me that she had decided not to attend the wedding at all because of the child-free rule. She said that she couldn't leave her kids with anyone and that asking her to do so was too much. She added that it wasn't fair that I was asking her to choose between her children and our friendship. She was visibly upset, and I could tell she was hurt by my decision. She said, "If you can't respect my family, maybe we shouldn't be friends anymore." I was completely taken aback. I had always been understanding of her role as a mom, and I never asked her to choose between her kids and me. I just didn't want kids at my wedding. It was nothing personal. I tried to explain this to her, but it didn't seem to help. She remained firm in her decision not to attend, and even though I tried to keep the conversation civil, I could feel the tension growing between us. Now I'm stuck. Rachel has been avoiding me for weeks, and I feel like our friendship is falling apart. I haven't heard from her much, and when I reach out, she's either distant or ignores me completely. I know that her kids mean everything to her, and I respect that, but I feel like she's making it impossible for me to stand my ground without causing more damage to our friendship. I've had other friends tell me that I shouldn't let her manipulate me into changing my wedding plans just to make her happy, but part of me feels guilty. I don't want to lose her as a friend, but I also don't want to compromise on something that's so important to me and Mark. I've been really conflicted about whether or not I should have made an exception for her. Maybe I should have been more understanding of her situation, but I don't know where the line is when it comes to accommodating others at the expense of my own desires. I've talked to Mark about it, and he agrees that we should stick to our original plan, but I can't shake the feeling that I've lost a good friend over something that could have been avoided. So, AITA for sticking to the child-free rule at my wedding and potentially losing my friendship with Rachel? Would I have been wrong to make an exception for her? Or did I do the right thing by standing my ground? AITA for refusing to go to my friend's last-minute trip and not giving her the money she asked for? I, 29M, have a close friend, Chloe, 28F, who I've known for over 5 years. We've always gotten along really well, and I consider her one of my best friends. She's the type of person who has big dreams and is always chasing the next thing, which is something I admire. But over the last few years, I've started to notice that some of her behavior has been getting harder for me to deal with. Chloe has always been a bit impulsive. She jumps into things without thinking them through, and then asks for help when things don't go as planned. For the most part, I've been there for her, whether it was helping with moving apartments, lending a hand when she needed to study, or just being the person she could vent to. But over time, the pattern has been the same. Chloe's life is full of spontaneous decisions and chaotic situations, and I've often found myself cleaning up the mess. A few months ago, Chloe came to me with a plan to go on a last-minute trip to Europe with a group of friends. She was super excited and kept telling me about how amazing it was going to be, how life-changing it would be, and how she felt she really needed to get away. I thought it sounded like a great opportunity for her, but when I asked about the logistics, like the costs, the planning, and how she was going to make it work, she just brushed it off. She mentioned that the flight was already booked and they were planning to stay in hostels, so it wouldn't be too expensive. At first, I wasn't really concerned, but then she asked me if I could lend her $1,500 for the trip. She explained that she had booked everything impulsively without realizing how much it would actually cost, and she needed the money to cover her food and travel expenses while she was there. I was shocked by the request. Chloe isn't exactly irresponsible with money, but she isn't exactly great with it either. She's always been a bit of a spender, and I know she's been in financial trouble before, borrowing money from friends and family to make ends meet. When she asked me for the loan, I told her I didn't think it was a good idea. I explained that I wasn't comfortable giving her that much money for a trip, especially since I didn't feel like she was taking her financial situation seriously. I reminded her that if she couldn't afford the trip, maybe it wasn't the best time to go, and she should consider rescheduling it for a time when she could plan and save properly. Chloe got defensive and said I was being unsupportive. She insisted that the trip was important for her mental health and that I should be more understanding. But I stood my ground and told her I couldn't lend her that much money. She didn't take the news well. Chloe kept trying to convince me, saying things like, I'll pay you back, and it's just a loan, I'll make sure to send it back when I get back from the trip. But I told her that I didn't feel comfortable with the situation. I've lent money to friends before, and more often than not, I've never seen it again, so I wasn't in a position to take that kind of risk, especially for something like a vacation. After that conversation, things started to get tense between us. Chloe stopped texting me as frequently and started complaining to our mutual friend about how unsupportive I was. She said that I was too focused on money and that I didn't understand how important this trip was for her. I heard through the grapevine that she was telling people that I was judging her for living her life and not being there when she needed me. I tried to explain to our friends that I wasn't judging her. I just didn't think lending her money for a trip was the right thing to do, especially given her financial history. But some of them took Chloe's side, saying I should have been there for her. They said things like, she's your friend, you should help her out, and it's just a loan, she'll pay you back. A week before the trip, Chloe asked me if I could help her out with another $500. She said that the exchange rate for the currency in Europe was worse than expected, and she needed a little extra to cover her expenses. At this point, I felt like I couldn't keep up. Not only had I already told her no the first time, but it seemed like she wasn't taking the trip seriously at all. She was already asking for more money even before going on the trip, and I wasn't convinced she'd ever pay me back. I told her again that I couldn't help and explained that I thought she needed to reconsider the trip if she couldn't afford it. She got upset again and said, I can't believe you won't help me. I thought you were my friend. That stung a little, but I knew I had made the right decision. I didn't want to be taken advantage of, and I felt like if I lent her the money, I'd be enabling her to continue making poor financial choices. I also didn't want to become someone she only went to when she needed money. So, the day of the trip came, and Chloe went on her vacation. The whole time, she posted about it on social media, showing pictures of herself at beautiful places, eating at fancy restaurants, and enjoying herself. A part of me was happy for her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a bubble, ignoring the fact that she had asked for money and that I had refused. Now, I've been getting messages from mutual friends saying that I'm being a bad friend, that I should have supported her, and that it's just a loan. But I still feel like I made the right choice. I didn't want to get stuck in this cycle of enabling her impulsiveness and bad financial habits. So, AITA for refusing to help her out and not giving her the money she asked for. AITA for telling my cousin I won't support her wedding after she publicly shamed my fiancé for his past. I, 27M, have always been very close with my cousin Sarah, 26F. We grew up together, our families are close, and we've always considered each other best friends. We've had some rocky patches over the years, but we've always managed to work through them. I've always had her back no matter what. Recently, Sarah got engaged to her boyfriend, Adam, 28M, and they've been planning their wedding for about a year now. I was happy for her at first, and I was excited to celebrate her big day, but things took a sharp turn when my fiancée, Olivia, 28F, was involved in a situation at Sarah's bridal shower. Let me give some context. Olivia and I have been together for 3 years now, and we recently got engaged. She's a kind, compassionate woman, and we have a solid relationship. I've always been upfront about my past with her, including some mistakes I made when I was younger. Before we started dating, I had a pretty chaotic few years in my early 20s. I got involved with the wrong crowd, and while I never did anything truly criminal, I definitely made some bad decisions. I struggled with addiction for a brief period, and I went through a phase where I was reckless with my finances and relationships. However, I turned my life around a few years ago, and I've been sober and focused on building a positive future ever since. Olivia knows about all of this, and she's been incredibly supportive and proud of the progress I've made. Now, Sarah and I have always been close, but she doesn't know about the full extent of my past. I've never felt the need to go into detail with her, especially since we've mostly kept the focus on our present-day lives. However, during Sarah's bridal shower, things got a bit complicated. Olivia and I were sitting at a table with some of Sarah's friends and family when Sarah's mom, Kathy, 52F, started asking questions about how Olivia and I met. Olivia gave a brief explanation of how we met at a mutual friend's party and how we clicked right away. It was a simple, sweet story, but then Kathy asked, "So, Olivia, how did you know he wasn't still messing around with his old habits?" I was taken aback by the question. I know Kathy means well, but it felt intrusive, especially in front of people I didn't know well. Olivia gave a polite answer, saying she trusted me and had seen the changes I'd made. But then Sarah chimed in, and that's when things took a turn. She laughed and said, "Well, I guess that's good, considering you've both got baggage. I mean, didn't you have a bit of a rough patch back in the day, my name?" I remember hearing stuff about you before Olivia came around. The comment caught me completely off guard. I had never spoken about my past to anyone in our family, and I thought it was something Sarah respected. I don't know if she meant it to be a joke, but it was hurtful. She had never mentioned anything about my past to Olivia before, and to bring it up in such a public way felt like a betrayal. Olivia immediately looked uncomfortable, and I could tell she was shocked by the comment. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I was fuming. Later that evening, after things had calmed down, I took Sarah aside and asked her why she felt the need to bring up something so personal and painful in front of everyone. She seemed genuinely confused, saying that she thought it was just a funny comment and didn't realize it would make me uncomfortable. I told her that I had moved past those years, and it was none of her business to bring it up, especially in front of my fiancé, who had nothing to do with it. She apologized and said she didn't mean any harm, but I could tell she didn't fully understand why it upset me. A few days later, things escalated. I was talking to Olivia about the bridal shower incident, and she admitted that she felt uncomfortable around Sarah because of the way she spoke about my past. She said that while she understood that everyone has a history, Sarah had made her feel like she was dating someone with a dark secret, and it was making her doubt our relationship. I was furious. I understood that Sarah's comment was probably meant to be lighthearted, but it had caused real harm to our relationship. Olivia felt like she wasn't being taken seriously and that my family didn't respect the work I'd done to better myself. I decided to confront Sarah. I called her and told her that I was upset with how she had handled the situation at the bridal shower. I explained that I felt disrespected, and I didn't think it was appropriate for her to publicly bring up my past, especially in front of Olivia. I also told her that I didn't feel comfortable supporting her wedding if she couldn't understand why this was a problem. I told her that I felt like she didn't have my back, and it made me question whether I wanted to be part of the celebration if she wasn't going to treat my relationship with Olivia with the respect it deserved. Sarah was shocked. She said she was just trying to be funny and that I was overreacting. She told me that it wasn't a big deal and that I needed to let it go. I tried to explain that it wasn't just about the joke. It was about how it made Olivia feel and how it undermined the progress I had made in my life. I told her that I needed her to acknowledge that it was a problem if she wanted me to be a part of her wedding. She responded by saying that if I couldn't get over it, then maybe I shouldn't come at all. Since that conversation, things have been tense. I haven't heard from Sarah much, and when I reached out to try and smooth things over, she basically told me I was being too sensitive and that it wasn't worth getting upset over. I haven't made a final decision yet, but I'm leaning toward not attending the wedding. I feel like this whole situation has made me question whether Sarah truly cares about me or if she just expects me to ignore my own feelings for the sake of her wedding. So, AITA for telling my cousin I won't support her wedding after she publicly shamed my fiancé for my past. Was I too harsh, or did I have a right to stand up for myself and Olivia? AITA for refusing to attend my best friend's birthday party after she threw a huge fit over a gift I gave her. I, 30F, have a best friend, Sarah, 29F, who I've known for over 10 years. We met in college and instantly hit it off. We've always been there for each other through thick and thin, and I consider her one of the most important people in my life. That said, things have started to change in the last year or so, and a situation that occurred recently really made me question our friendship. A little context, Sarah has always been a bit of a perfectionist. She's one of those people who expects everything to be just right, and if something doesn't go her way, she tends to get upset. Over the years, I've learned to be understanding about her quirks, but it's becoming more difficult, especially when her behavior starts to affect our friendship. For her birthday this year, Sarah decided she wanted to have a big celebration. Nothing crazy, but she rented a nice venue, invited a bunch of people, and planned a fancy dinner. She's always been into high-end things, and she's not shy about it. In fact, she's been dropping hints for months about what she wanted for her birthday gift. I didn't mind. It was obvious she was expecting something nice, and I wanted to get her something she'd love. I spent a considerable amount of time thinking about the perfect gift for Sarah. She's a huge fan of luxury items, particularly designer handbags. However, I know that she already has a pretty extensive collection, so I didn't want to get her something she already owned or something that would just add to her clutter. I decided to go in a slightly different direction and purchased her a custom-designed leather tote bag from a small independent designer. It wasn't as expensive as a designer brand, but it was unique, made to order, and tailored specifically to her tastes. When I gave her the gift at her birthday party, I was excited to see her reaction. But instead of the joy I expected, she looked confused and somewhat disappointed. She asked, "What is this?" And I explained that it was a custom design bag that I thought she'd love. I even showed her some of the designer's other work to highlight how special and unique the gift was. She didn't say anything at first, but smiled awkwardly and thanked me. I thought she was just being polite, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But over the next few hours, the tension started to build. Sarah barely spoke to me, and she kept glancing at the gift with a frown. At one point, I overheard her telling one of our friends that she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with the bag, and that it didn't really match her style. I was shocked. I thought the gift was thoughtful and that it suited her taste, but clearly I was wrong. The night continued, and I noticed she seemed distant and irritated. At one point, she asked me to take a photo of her with some of the other guests. As I was taking the picture, she turned to me and said, "Honestly, I don't know why you thought this would be a good gift. I've told you a million times I wanted something more expensive, something that would actually show I matter to you." I was stunned. I tried to brush it off, but she kept going, saying that the gift was cheap and not even something I'd wear. She went on about how I clearly didn't know her taste as well as I thought, and how she had been expecting something grander for her birthday. The conversation escalated quickly, and before I knew it, we were arguing in front of the entire group of guests. I felt embarrassed and hurt, especially since I'd spent a lot of time choosing the gift and considering what she'd like. After the party, I texted her to apologize and said that I was sorry she didn't like the gift, but I also expressed that I felt hurt by how she reacted. I told her I'd done my best to get her something meaningful, and I felt like she was more focused on the price tag than the thought behind it. Her response was cold. She said I was overreacting and that I was being dramatic about her reaction. She told me that if I was really her best friend, I would have known exactly what she wanted and would have gotten it for her without any issues. She also said that if I cared about her, I would have spent more money to show it. I tried to explain that gifts are supposed to be about the thought, not just the price. But she didn't seem to care. Over the next week, she kept bringing up how disappointed she was in me, saying that the gift was a reflection of how little I valued our friendship. She started posting about how she deserved better on social media, and even hinted that the gift was subpar compared to what other friends had given her. At this point, I was fed up. I felt like no matter how much I explained my side, she wasn't listening. I felt completely unappreciated and taken for granted. After a few days of this, I decided to take a step back. I texted her and said that I needed some space because I didn't appreciate how she was treating me. I told her that I was hurt by how she handled the situation and that I didn't think it was fair to me for her to put such an emphasis on money over the thoughtfulness of a gift. Sarah didn't take it well. She immediately called me and demanded to know why I was ghosting her. She told me that I was being petty and dramatic and that I should just let it go. She said that the only reason she reacted the way she did was because she was disappointed and that she expected better from me. I still haven't responded. Since then, she's been posting passive-aggressive comments on social media, and a few mutual friends have reached out to say I should just let it go and be the bigger person. I've been debating whether to reach out and try to fix things, but I'm honestly unsure. I feel like I've done everything I could to show her that I care, and the whole situation left me feeling drained and unappreciated. So, AITA for refusing to go to her birthday party after how she treated me, and for standing my ground about the gift. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.